An important part of getting better at Magic is to understand matchups. We've all heard of the classic deck archetypes: aggro, combo, control, mid-range, tempo, and we've all experienced these matchups and understand that playing an aggro deck against a combo deck is a very different Magic experience from trying to play a control deck against a mid-range matchup. An important part of navigating a format like Timeless is understanding these different deck archetypes, understanding how these decks interact with each other, and how you should play against each different archetype and how you should be sideboarding against them. So the goal of this video is going to help you to understand the mess that is the Timeless competitive format and categorize your decks so that you can make some sideboard plans and hopefully win some more games. This is also broadly applicable to all sorts of formats, not just Timeless, but I'm the Timeless guy on YouTube. So that's what we're going to talk about first and foremost. And sorry, we're not an arena. I've tricked you into watching another PowerPoint. I just described several archetypes, but now I'm going to sell you a bridge and convince you that there's only three. The first is fair decks. Fair decks are also called aggro decks or mid-range decks, and in Timeless you can imagine your energy deck is a very fair deck that's currently in the meta. Then there's unfair decks, also known as combo decks. Show and tell, classic unfair deck. They show and tell and omniscience into play, and they just win the game for 3 mana. It's BS, it's unfair, it's nonsense. And then lastly, we have control decks. That's your classic mana drain Teferi, the guy who is going to prevent the other decks from doing their thing. And typically, if you've played some Timeless, by now that you know, those combo decks are always going to be beating up on those fair energy decks. The control decks are going to counterspell every combo card, and the aggro decks are going to get under control's skin and put out more threats than they can answer. And generally, this is how the very basic matchups of these three archetypes go. It's a little bit more nuanced than that, so I'm going to get rid of the arrows really quickly. And let's start talking about the nuance. Let's think about Yawgmoth. Yawgmoth as a deck. Where would you put it in this trinity? Do you think it's an aggro deck where it's on the beatdown, or do you think it is a combo deck where it's mostly just trying to do the infinite life drain combo? The correct answer is that this is really a spectrum, and that is right in between the two. This is a creature deck that has a combo finish, and we can categorize more decks on the spectrum as well. There are Primeval Titan combo decks on Arena, which are very unfair. They're just trying to cast a primetime way ahead of schedule, usually with a natural order, and they're trying to win the game on the spot after they cast that natural order. However, at the end of the day, it is a creature combat deck. They do have to attack with their primetime and their zombie tokens in order to actually win the game. They don't have access to something like Valakut, so you could say it is on the spectrum, but 90+% of the way over that way towards unfair. You can also think of more fair combo decks than Yawgmoth. Previously on this channel, we made an Amalia combo deck where it was really just a Lurrus deck that had the backdoor Amalia combo in it so that you could late game do a combo. And that combo is going to be really strong against an aggro deck, like the Guide of Souls deck, but it's not all in on the combo, so when you're playing against Show and Tell, you could still just get in on those aggro beatdowns. So let's think about these different decks. Think about Yawgmoth and how it actually faces up against these other decks that I just described. When Yawgmoth is playing against the Guide of Souls decks, they are playing combo control. The Guide of Souls deck is going to try to overwhelm the Yawgmoth deck. They're trying to get on the beatdown and turn their creatures sideways. Yawgmoth is using their removal spells on the 1-drops. Yawgmoth is killing the creatures with Yawgmoth's activated ability, and eventually they're going to put a Blood Artist into play, put a Hapatra into play, and they're going to do their infinite loop and win the game. But when Yawgmoth is up against Show and Tell, Yawgmoth is on the beatdown. They are racing to turn their creatures sideways and kill the Show and Tell player. Now, of course, they could also do the infinite combo against Show and Tell, but if Show and Tell's not putting up blockers, you might as well just turn your creatures sideways. Same with the Primetime deck. They're not putting down a blocker until that Primetime hits the battlefield, except for little creatures like Arboreal Grazer, they could just go around or kill with your single removal spell. So you can see how Yawgmoth as a deck will kind of pivot its game plan based on what it's playing against. And while we're here, let's go ahead and fill out the rest of the graph. Between aggro and control, there are what is known as tempo decks. People love tempo decks, and I've seen some really cool ones on Arena lately. There are some based around Psychic Frog and Tameo and a Lurrus Shell that have just been really awesome lately, and a lot of people have been playing that. That's a classic tempo deck. It has your aggro creatures, it is winning by turning creatures sideways, but you're playing mana drain in the deck. That's sweet. Also, you can call Grief Scam decks somewhere between aggro and control. depending on the scam build, there's a lot of different scam builds. It's going to lean like more towards aggro or more towards control. Like the beans builds with like Solitude, those are very controlling. The mono black grief builds, those are much more towards aggro than control, but they are on that spectrum in between. And now that we have everything here, actually, right, there is one more side to this coin, and that is combo control. It's something that doesn't exist in Timeless like right now, so we're not going to talk about it much, but like theoretically an Indomitable Creativity deck that uses like red removal to control the board and then does the creativity combo, that's combo control. You also have like a blue-red sneak attack deck. You know, you use your counter spells, then you drop sneak attack and win. That kind of deal does not exist in the meta right now. And these are the classifications we talked about before. We have combo control, which isn't a force in Timeless. It's been a force in other formats in the past. Tempo decks and creature combo decks, of course. So now that we've laid everything out, let's think the same way that we thought about the Yawgmoth deck about our cool tempo deck. When our cool Psychic Frog deck is up against control, it's on the beatdown. It's going to be turning its Psychic Frog sideways and trying to beat down the control player and using its counter spells to defend its creatures. When our Psychic Frog deck is against the aggro deck, they're going to be using their counter spells to answer the aggressive creatures, and they're going to use their removal spells to get the creatures out of the way. They're going to play controlling and then hopefully eventually crash through lethal after they slow down the game enough and draw a bunch of cards off of their Psychic Frog or Treasure Cruise or whatever their card advantage engine is. And then lastly, when they're up against unfair decks, they're doing the tempo thing. They're applying pressure and controlling elements against that combo deck. And you can see why that's a very good matchup for them. All right, so what does this all mean? I said a lot of words and a lot of deck names. This means that at all times, either you are on the beatdown, you are trying to combo, or you are playing control. One of those three things at all times. And this will change based on what deck you're playing against. And it can also change based on whether you're on the draw or on the play, especially when you're playing the mirror. Think about it. If an energy deck is mirroring another energy deck, the one that's on the play is generally beating down, and then the one that is on the draw is usually controlling. But then the deck on the play could have a really slow draw, and it can like have no creatures, it could have a slow unstable amulet hand, and the deck that went second has like triple Guide of Souls, a really good opening hand. The deck that went second becomes on the beatdown. The phrase on the beatdown is like a classic part of Magic lingo at this point. I think there was a very old article a while ago, and it's something that all competitive players will come to understand at one point, that there's always a deck that is on the beatdown, turning its creatures sideways, and there's always a deck that is defending itself whenever you have a fair deck mirror. All right, so let's talk about those three scenarios that we had on the last slide. If you are on the beatdown, what do? You're going to try not to over-sideboard. Over-sideboarding is a mistake. You do not want to dilute your threat suite when you are on the beatdown. You want to sideboard in direct, efficient answers against combo. So when I'm playing my energy deck, I swear I'd board in the 1-mana Deafening Silence, and I take out removal spells that aren't useful, but I try not to take out my creatures, because those are really important. I can sideboard in Disruptor Flute if I'm against Goblin Charbelcher, because that is a direct, efficient answer to what they have. I try not to take out my creatures. If I'm against control, I can bring in a defensive option such as Thoughtseize. Thoughtseize in this sense is defensive because I'm going to take their mass removal spell out of their hand. There's also other defensive options that aren't played much in Timeless. Like, for example, if you had a white card that said all creatures you control gain indestructible, that is a defensive option against control. It is not a card people play, but it is theoretically something that would fall into the same category that I'm talking about. I'm the combo deck. What do? Again, don't over sideboard. Don't dilute your combo. You need to be able to draw your combo pieces. You shouldn't take out your combo pieces, and you shouldn't take out your card draw either. You'll notice a lot of combo decks in this format bring in free spells. Force of Vigor, Leyline of Sanctity, Pact of Negation. These are all free spells. They all cost 0, and they use it because combo decks are so fast in this format, they don't want to be spending mana to defend themselves. They want to try to combo on turn 3, spend 0 mana on either a Force or a Pact, and do their thing as soon as possible. Note that most of these are what I would call defensive sideboarding. So Pact of Negation and Leyline of Sanctity are just ways to defend the combo, And there is a second category of things which are attacking sideboard cards. For example, Force of Vigor is to take out the Deafening Silence and the Disruptor Flute from this last page. Because most sideboard cards are artifacts and enchantments, that's a 0-mana way to answer all of them. And that's why you see some timeless players doing some fun things like playing the 3-mana Gideon Planeswalker that says you can't lose the game as a sideboard option in unfair matchups. Because then the unfair player looks at it and says, dang it, I only brought in Force of Vigor. I can't kill your Planeswalker now. And then you end up with this fun sideboarding arms race where people change up their sideboards based on what's commonly played. I'll make a separate video talking about specific sideboard cards and what you should bring in. And lastly, when you're the control mage, what should you do? So when you're control, by the way, I'm not a control mage. This is the archetype I play the least, so my advice is not going to be great, but my general advice is you're going to look at all 75 cards in your deck, and you're going to decide which 60 are the most relevant that will allow you to contain your opponent. Make sure you have your answers, make sure you have the card draw to get them, and I've included some sample cards that are very well played in the format. Wrath of the Skies, I think, is the best positioned board wipe in the format right now. That just answers everything clean from that energy deck that's at the top of the meta. It answers creatures, artifacts, and enchantments very efficiently. Big Needle, 1 mana to answer to everything, and of course, your mana drain. That's it. We did it. You learned the very basics of matchups. I'm going to make a few videos in the sideboard where I talk specifically about Timeless and what sideboard cards you should bring in, because I did give you a couple of examples on these last page. Like, yeah, these are cards that I have in all of my aggro decks, and these are cards I recommend that you play as long as you are in white and black. But I'm not telling you exactly what decks should run them, what the alternatives are. We can go over that more in depth. The point of this video was just to get across in about 12 minutes. That was a fast recording session. The basics of how to understand matchups and where decks fall in this. Where's my diagram? Wonderful diagram that is a competitive Magic format. Thanks for watching, folks. Hope you learned something.